On December 16, 2012, a 23-year-old paramedic student was assaulted on a moving bus in Delhi. The attack was exceptionally brutal, and 10 days later she died from her injuries. Within days, tens of thousands of citizens poured into the streets of major Indian cities. The scale of these demonstrations paralyzed the capital, as protesters clashed directly with security forces. The crime exposed severe structural vulnerabilities within India's legal architecture, acting as a stress test that revealed the limits of both the courts and the legislature. To understand the legacy of the case, we have to analyze the systemic response across two parallel legal tracks: procedural law, driven by the judiciary, and substantive law, driven by the legislature. The top track traces the 7-year judicial process required to prosecute, convict, and eventually execute the adult perpetrators. The bottom track reveals a faster pace, capturing the dense legislative action that rewrote the nation's penal code in less than 3 years. Examining both tracks side by side reveals how a slow-moving procedural system clashed with rapid statutory lawmaking driven by public pressure. The immediate law enforcement response was swift. Within days of the attack, police identified and apprehended 6 individuals. The primary accused, the bus driver, died in judicial custody at Tihar jail early in the proceedings, leaving 5 remaining defendants. Immediately, the prosecution hit a jurisdictional split that divided those defendants. One of the offenders was a minor. Under the existing Juvenile Justice Act, the courts were strictly prohibited from trying him as an adult, regardless of the crime's severity. He was routed through the juvenile system and received a 3-year sentence in a reform facility, the absolute maximum penalty permitted under Indian law at the time. Meanwhile, the 4 remaining adult defendants faced a different legal trajectory. They were assigned to a newly formed fast-track court designed to expedite the trial process. This fast-track mandate delivered rapid results. By September 2013, barely 9 months after the attack, all 4 men were convicted of rape and murder. In delivering the verdict, the judge officially classified the crime as a rarest of rare case. In the Indian legal system, this classification allows the court to award the death penalty. This initial phase exposed a glaring procedural disparity, a system capable of securing swift capital convictions for adults, yet bound by inflexible statutory limitations for violent juvenile offenders. While the trial court moved quickly, those convictions immediately triggered a multi-year appellate phase. The defense utilized standard legal channels to challenge the verdict. The Delhi High Court reviewed the case and upheld the sentences in 2014. The case then escalated to the nation's highest judicial authority. In 2017, the Supreme Court of India upheld the sentences once again. The following year, the Supreme Court dismissed subsequent review petitions filed by the defense. Having exhausted standard appeals, the defense turned to curative petitions, a rare judicial delay tactic. When courts closed those avenues, strategy shifted to the executive branch, filing overlapping mercy petitions to the president between 2019 and 2020. This barrage of late-stage filings created administrative friction, resulting in 4 separate official postponements of the execution dates. This exhausting procedural loop placed a heavy psychological burden on the victim's family, prompting her mother to publicly question the system's effectiveness. After every judicial and executive avenue was exhausted, the executions were finally carried out at Tihar jail on March 20, 2020. The 7-year timeline demonstrated how a sophisticated appellate structure functions as a slow-moving friction point, capable of delaying even aggressive fast-track mandates. If we rewind the narrative back to early 2013 and shift our focus from the courts to the legislature, we see a different kind of speed. Within weeks of the attack, the government appointed the Justice J.S. Verma Committee to urgently review the nation's laws on sexual assault. The committee worked at an astonishing pace, processing more than 80,000 public submissions to deliver a 600-page report in just 29 days. This work led directly to the passing of the Criminal Law Amendment Act of 2013. This act instituted 3 major changes. First, expanding narrow definitions of rape into a comprehensive framework. Second, codifying new offenses like stalking, voyeurism, and acid attacks. Third, introducing the death penalty for repeat offenders. It also introduced capital punishment for cases where an assault results in death or leaves the victim in a persistent vegetative state. Defining a persistent vegetative state established a new statutory threshold, removing legal ambiguity from the prosecution of severe assault cases. Within mere months, the legislature dismantled sections of an antiquated penal code and replaced them with a rigorous legal vocabulary. The legislative overhaul continued into 2015, driven by public frustration over the minor's 3-year sentence. This resulted in the passing of the Juvenile Justice Act of 2015. The statutory mechanism altered by this act was lowering the age limit for adult trial, moving it from 18 down to 16. This age reduction included a strict caveat, applying exclusively to individuals accused of heinous crimes. Parallel to these legislative acts, the government established the Nirbhaya Fund, dedicating 1,000 crore rupees to national safety initiatives. This secondary wave of legislation successfully closed the severe jurisdictional loopholes that the 2012 perpetrators had originally exposed. Bringing both tracks back into a unified perspective shows the full scale of the systemic response. This is a line graph charting reported rape cases in India since 1990. Notice the sharp, sudden upward spike starting immediately after 2012. This surge in reports created a data paradox. Official statistics for sexual assault climbed immediately after the state strengthened the laws and punishments. Legal scholars interpret this spike as evidence of a shattered taboo of silence. Because the new legal definitions recognized more offenses, victims had the statutory vocabulary and the institutional faith to come forward and report assaults. The catalyst for this structural shift was Jyoti Singh, the young woman the country came to call Nirbhaya. While her tragedy forced the legislature to replace outdated penal codes with a specific legal vocabulary, the daily reality of dismantling a culture of impunity remains an ongoing societal test. The Nirbhaya case forced an entire legal architecture to stop relying on outdated laws, demanding instead a rigorous framework that matched the severity of the violence it sought to prosecute.